1895. Young scientist Alexander Hartigan lives in New York and teaches applied mechanics at Columbia University. Alexander makes a date with his beloved Emma, where he plans to propose to her. On his way to the skating rink in Central Park for a date with Emma, he stops to buy flowers, but forgets about it, becoming interested in one of the first cars he sees on the street. Walking in the park with Emma, Alexander proposes to her and gives her an engagement ring. But at that moment, a robber with a revolver approaches them and demands Alexander's gloves and pocket watch. Seeing the ring on Emma's finger, he tries to take it. Alexander, who initially tried to resolve the matter peacefully, is forced to enter into a fight, but during the struggle, the robber accidentally shoots and fatally wounds Emma. She dies in Alexander's arms. A yearning and suffering Alexander spends for years in his laboratory, during which time he creates a time machine with which he intends to return to the past and save Emma. And when he, having moved to 1895, returns to that very same date, he avoids a robbery in the park and takes Emma from there. But when he leaves her briefly to buy flowers, Emma dies again, this time, having been hit by a carriage that overturned while trying to avoid a collision with the very car that Alexander had once become interested in. After this attempt to save his beloved, Alexander becomes convinced that no matter how many times he returns to the past, Emma will still die. Her death is inevitable. He tries to find an answer from his contemporaries to the question of why the past cannot be corrected, but, of course, does not find understanding. Then Alexander, believing that he was simply ahead of his time, uses his time machine to send him far into the future, hoping to find the answer there. While in his machine, he sees how everything is changing quickly. For him, seconds pass, but for the world, months. For him, minutes fly by, but for the world, decades. Alexander makes his first stop on May 24, 2030. There he learns that in the progressive future, humanity plans to build its first colony on the moon, conducting a series of thermonuclear explosions on its surface to create underground tunnels. To get an answer to his question, Alexander visits the museum and talks to the holographic librarian Vox 114, who is a guide to the knowledge base of humanity, and eventually learns that the idea of time travel has not received any development and is now nothing more than a fantastic myth. Alexander decides to continue his journey into the future, but after a couple of seconds he feels shaking, meaning some kind of catastrophe. He decides to stop on August 26, 2037. He sees a destroyed New York street. A minute later, the military arrives and tries to arrest him. He is shocked by what is happening and asks what happened. The military tells him that due to thermonuclear explosions used in the construction of the lunar colony, the moon has left its orbit, is splitting into pieces and is approaching the Earth. Then an earthquake begins and the military leaves Alexander, and they themselves try to save themselves. Alexander manages to climb into the time machine and start it. But due to the shaking, he hits his head on an element of the machine's design, loses consciousness and accidentally moves the control lever to the maximum position. The machine at full speed takes Alexander into the future. Hundreds of thousands of years fly by unnoticed by Alexander. Then he comes to his senses for only a second to stop the time machine when its dial shows July 16, 802,701, and then loses consciousness again. He is discovered and nursed back to health by local residents who call themselves the Eloi, distant descendants of humanity. Alexander comes to, dresses and leaves the hut, but finds dozens of similar huts clinging to the cliffs of the gorge like swallows' nests. A boy named Kellen notices that Alexander has woken up and tells everyone about it. People come up to him. He tries to speak, but they do not understand him. Then a girl named Mara speaks another language, and he understands her. She says that it is the language of stones, and that she is one of the few who understands this language. The locals are afraid of him and say that he should be thrown into the river, but Mara stands up for him and asks him about who he is and where he is from. He says that he has come from the past, but Mara does not believe him. She tells everyone that he has hit his head and is talking all sorts of incomprehensible nonsense. This makes everyone laugh. Then everyone gets ready for the night. Alexander can observe the beauty of the village, the huts of which resemble lamps, and in the sky he sees the moon torn into pieces. The evening was very pleasant for Alexander, because he was talking to a beautiful girl and everything around was peaceful and calm. The next day, Mara showed ancient stones with inscriptions and explained that her parents taught her this ancient language from these inscriptions. Later, while sailing in a boat, Alexander asked Mara why there were no elderly people among them. She replied that they had left this world. He does not understand how it is possible that all the old people died. But Mara does not want to explain and says that it is better to remain silent about some things. The people of this world prefer not to think about where the elderly go, but only honor their memory with the help of wind wings. Alexander can see the lifestyle of these people. They are engaged in fishing and hunting. It seems that Alexander has entered the Garden of Eden, because he sees young healthy people. Then Mara takes Alexander to the time machine and asks him to return to his time, and also asks him to take Kellen with him. But suddenly loud trumpet sounds are heard. Mara runs to save Kellen. Alexander still does not understand what is happening. He runs after her. Then he sees people running in panic to the sides. When suddenly he sees some monstrous monkey-like creature not far from him. These are the Morlocks, monsters that hunt people and drag them underground to their habitat. They surrounded a group of people and began to catch them one by one, carrying them underground with them. One Morlock ran after Kellen, but Alexander tried to save the boy by pushing the ugly monster away. The Morlock ran after Alexander, but he climbed to the top of the tower where the wind wings are located. The Morlock followed him and attacked him. Both fell down, after which the Morlock began to strangle Alexander. A few seconds later, Kellen drove the Morlock away with a flaming torch. Then a trumpet sounded and the monster ran away. After that, Alexander and Kellen heard Mara's scream. She was grabbed by one of the Morlocks. Alexander did not have time to help Mara. The Morlock grabbed her and disappeared underground. Alexander was shocked that the remaining people perceived such a life as the norm. No one was going to change anything. They explained to him that this is their world, and those who tried to fight the Morlocks are carried off first. Kellen explained to Alexander that after the Morlocks kidnap people, they cannot talk about it. After that, Kellen shows the place where the ghost lives. But of course, it is not a ghost but a holographic librarian Vox. He explains how one race split into two different creatures separated by evolution. Some lived above, and some below, developing and evolving as two different races. Having learned the truth about what the lower ones live off of, Alexander refuses to believe it. Then Vox says, if you don't like the answers, then you don't need to ask questions. Alexander asks Vox to help him find the Morlocks and save Mara. Alexander finds the entrance to the underground kingdom of the Morlocks and goes down. Under the ground there is a network of tunnels and caves in which the Morlocks work. He also finds one large room that looks like a slaughterhouse, and in which he sees a large pile of clothes. Seeing the metal hooks and large knives and sickles and realizing what they were for, Alexander was horrified. He recoiled, catching some lever, and subsequently fell into a pit with human bones. Alexander tried to get out of there, but was captured by some of the Morlocks. He was taken to a large room and locked there. Mara was in this room, but not only she. The leader of the Morlocks expressed a desire to talk to Alexander. He told him that the Morlocks are the descendants of people who moved underground after the disaster with the moon, and the Eloi are the descendants of people who remain to live on the surface. The Morlocks are a caste society, where each caste is a separate, specially bred biological species. The ruling caste are superintelligent telepaths. They kidnap the Eloi as food. Using his telepathic powers, the chief Morlock shows his knowledge of the past, both regarding Emma and the creation of the time machine. He explains to Alexander why he could not save Emma. It was only because of her death that he created the time machine, and if he had saved her, he would have no reason to create the device. The Morlocks took Alexander's time machine and brought it to their dungeon. The chief Morlock offers Alexander to go home, that is, back to 1899, leaving the future as it is. He gets into his time machine and asks the Morlock to return his watch. The Morlock approaches Alexander and hands him his watch. At that moment, Alexander grabs the Morlock by the hand and starts the time machine. A fight ensues between them, as a result of which the chief Morlock falls outside the sphere of the time machine and in a few seconds ages, rots and crumbles to dust, leaving his hands, which remained inside the sphere, on Alexander's neck. Alexander stops the car in 635,427,810 and sees a gloomy and deserted area around him. dotted only with Morlock towers and groups of chained humans being led by Morlocks to slaughter. Human evolution and history have long ended, and everything has reached a dead end with no hope of revival. The Earth has finally turned into hell. Mara remains in the dungeon and tries to get out of the cage when Alexander suddenly appears. He frees Mara and turns his time machine into a bomb. To do this, he blocks the mechanism of the time machine with a pocket watch. Then Alexander and Mara run away, locking a pack of monsters in a cave. Other Morlocks chase them and try to catch up with them. But as soon as Alexander and Mara get to the top below, the time machine explodes, killing all the Morlocks and destroying all the monster dungeons. And although you can't change the past, Alexander has thus changed the future. Now humanity can develop again. Vox, who has been bored for a long time, now has a very interesting occupation. He is engaged in training people who must revive civilization. Now Alexander has a new family, and it seems he will find his happiness in this new world.